Hello, everybody. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Gary Painter, and I am the department chair of the Department of Public Policy and the School of Public Policy here at the Sol Price School of Public Policy. I also serve as the director of the Price Center for Social Innovation. We've enacted a series of conversations this year with change makers, some of whom are Price alums and others are affiliated with the school in one way or the other. And obviously in this moment, while we're dealing with the pandemic, there are very specific things that are of acute focus, but more broadly, we wanted to have a series of conversations with folks to kind of just share their journeys and how they've been able to make an impact. Again, some, as our guest today, Nicole Brown, is an alum of the Price School since leaving the Price School, and others are people who we are partnering with in various ways. Today, we're also privileged to have Roberto Suro, a faculty member both in the Price School of Public Policy and also in the Annenberg School of Communication, to actually facilitate the conversation with Nicole Brown. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Roberto. We have about a half hour here together. For those of you who are joining us in the webinar, you can use the Q&A function to submit questions. And otherwise, I will again turn it over to you, Roberto. So thank you very much for leading our conversation with Nicole today. And it's good to see you again, Nicole.
Thanks so much. Nice to see you too.
Thank you, Gary, for the introduction, and thank you, Nicole, for being with us this afternoon. So you heard my introduction from Gary. Just briefly about Nicole. She's currently a senior policy analyst at the Urban Peace Institute, where she's been working on a number of criminal justice reform measures and advocacy efforts here in Los Angeles County since graduating in 2018. We're going to fill in the rest of your biography a little bit in bits and pieces here. I want to talk a little bit about your life before Price, what you did at the school, and then what's happened since. So let's start. You finished college in 2009. You came to Price in 2018. Curious about what led you to Price and to a master's degree after you had been out in the world for a number of years already developing your profession.
Well, first off, thanks. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, my path kind of took me, I think that like through my early college years and after, I was very focused on traveling and getting to know the world, and particularly Latin America, which is where my mother's from. My mother's from Chile. And then and also part of that too was because I graduated in 2009 at the peak of the recession. So it seemed better to just find places to go and not spend too much money, because jobs were not exactly abundant at that time. So after college, went to Chile, lived there for a little over a year. And then that kind of led me to I've always been like politically minded and motivated. And that led me to, I think my experience living and traveling in Latin America, and the fact that I'm bilingual led me to want to work with Latino communities like in the United States and really try to affect change in the United States. And so just kind of one thing led to the other, like Googling for internships. I ended up working at an organization, this was in Portland, Oregon, called CAUSA, which is Oregon's like lead immigrant rights organization. And through that internship, I started registering voters, started getting really like, learning how to kind of use and work political systems for change. And through that, got connected to the larger networks of social justice and advocacy. And I ended up working as a community organizer at the Center for Intercultural Organizing, which is now called Unite Oregon, and their grassroots policy advocacy organization. And I worked in electoral stuff. And the fun thing about working in Oregon is that it's a smaller place. And so I feel for about 4 years, I was working as an organizer and became the field director of that organization. And I got to have my hands in so many different things, from state legislature, working on ballot measure campaigns, working at city level task forces. And so I think the small nature of the state, I feel like I maybe wouldn't have gotten that same level of experience. I got to a point where I was feeling like I wanted to know more about policy. I was good at organizing people for change, but there was, for instance, one campaign in particular around police profiling that we were working on, and we'd get our win, and it was like, okay, what are we going to push for next? And I remember just like not feeling like I had that skill set to really look at the problem from a macro level and be able to be like, okay, like here's the playbook. We're going to do this. Now we're going to do this. And to kind of have that picture of everything contributing towards the problem. And that's just one example, but essentially that made me want to go back to school and to really be able to learn and study public policy, which is what brought me to Price. I was drawn to LA and just the diversity of experiences here. And that's how I ended up at USC.
And did Price deliver that ability to see the connections? Did you tell us a little bit what you found and what you didn't find?
No, it really did. I mean, I think that at first, what I didn't find that I found frustrating, but I think in the end kind of was a blessing. It was like, I was so used to being an advocate, and I was kind of pushed to maybe be a little bit more neutral or take a step back and to better kind of just understand the landscape and do like our problem definition for all the MPPs that are listening. I believe that, we were taught to like try to learn how to pull up the hood of the engine and see all of the pieces that lead to the engine and define the problem and be able to then pick certain policy solutions that are going to strategically get you towards that change. So I definitely feel like I got that and use it every day in my work, since we're never being able to move everything that we want to at once. And so it's like, how can we strategically move the pieces that we need to move to lead up to a greater sum of its parts?
Yeah. Do you think the fact that you had been out of the classroom for already a good number of years, at that point 6-7 years, changed the way you approach graduate school?
Yes, I think that I already knew kind of who I was as a professional in some ways. I knew that I was already in the field in many ways that I wanted to work in. And so I think it really allowed me to zero in on the skills that I wanted. Like I knew what I was already good at, and it was like, this is where I need to grow. So I think that it allowed me to do that. And I also think that, it was a challenge, but then also I think, I don't know, I was able to have kind of like program management skills that I had built as a professional that I was able to apply to school. And then on the other flip side, I hadn't been so long since I've been in school. The first semester was really hard because I just hadn't studying and producing school stuff is like a totally different skill set as well. So I think it was both beneficial, but also had its challenges, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's talk about your work since graduation, and particularly your sense of yourself as a change agent, as an advocate, which has been sort of a through line in a lot of your work, and certainly in the criminal justice area. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what tools you have found most effective in pursuing your own personal goals.
So I currently work at the Urban Peace Institute. Our mission is to, we are focused on reducing violence, but also combating mass incarceration as a system that really destabilizes communities and oftentimes perpetuates conditions that lead to more community violence. So I work in our Smart Justice team. And we focus, my particular focus is on juvenile justice reform in LA County. We are in an exciting time of criminal and juvenile justice. Generally, a lot of momentum coming long before, I was able to come and start working on these issues here in LA County. So we do have some of our primary goals. I work in a coalition called the Los Angeles Youth Uprising Coalition. We're a coalition of folks who are kind of more on the policy wonk side, like ourselves, but then also a core component is working with organizations who are really center and are made up of people who are impacted by the criminal and juvenile justice system themselves, and also recognize their own expertise and they are also, it's not to say I'm the policy person and they're bringing folks, but they are also part of that policy change and analysis. So a big major focus right now is we're really trying to reimagine, a word that people use a lot right now, what LA County's juvenile justice system can look like. And how can we create a system that's not just based on punishment, but that's based on principles of youth development, so that so often young people, are in many communities and particularly in LA County and all over the country, right? Low income communities of color, the types of behavior that all youth go through. And, be it, an upper middle class white community, doesn't matter where, right? Like young people are young people, but the way that we respond to their actions are radically different based on where they're from, what they look like, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And so many young people, particularly in LA County, have just been met with criminalization, and entering that system is really not a good thing, right? Because the likelihood that you're going to continue down that path is, data just shows that it's so much more, it increases so much more, it creates trauma. It kind of, and oftentimes introduces youth to criminal behavior that they would have never been introduced to in the first place. So we're trying to create a new system that, recognizes the trauma that a lot of youth have faced, and that really tries to preempt folks entering the justice system in the first place, which is, a big focus is also supporting Los Angeles County's Office of Youth Development and Diversion, and promoting pre-arrest diversion among young people, which is an area that I got to study for a long time, working with you, Roberto, and in the Tomas Rivera Policy Institute, as we, in part of a great transition from my time as a student to what I do now, was being able to work as a research assistant and really immerse myself in learning these best practice policies. So I kind of went off the rails there, but, trying to both prevent, create a new system, and then the other major goal is reinvest the dollars from our old system, which are being spent in, there's a lot of money going towards incarcerating a very small number of youth. And how can we use those dollars and divert them towards effective systems that are, focused on healing, and that are focused on youth development and making young people be successful,
So we're at about the halfway point of our session. So let me invite the audience members out there. If you've got questions, just please put them in chat and we'll get to them. And in the meantime, let me ask you something else. Criminal justice, particularly at the juvenile level, or probation, really anywhere you look, but juvenile justice is particularly complicated. As a policy matter, you've got fiendishly complex problems involving a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different institutions, in a lot of different definitions of what's in the public interest and how you measure policy success. You add on to that now, in particular, in this summer, very vividly, but really now for several years, this very powerful social movement component. And that's driving energy, that's driving attention, that's creating policy agendas and priorities. As a self-described person coming from the somewhat wonky side, talk about that interaction between policy analysis, the looking under the hood, the seeing how the pieces work, and then dealing with social movements that elicit a great deal of emotion, as well as political power.
I think that it's I think that it is trying to do both. And I always like, I started as an organizer and I feel like I always kind of try to identify that. I always identify with that almost first, which is like, how do I bring this information to average people and how can they process it and uplift what needs to happen next? So I think what, as a person who, you know, as I've gone to school and learned how to research and understand best practices and stuff, I think I see it as almost like a bridge of bringing that information, helping, working with the community to identify like community members who are impacted by the system, identifying the gaps, identifying, you know, what strategically could happen next within a county space or a city space, and then going back and using that skill set to be able to then say, okay, like, this is what other people are doing. This is what, you know, like doing the lit review, like saying these are the best practices, et cetera. And then another tool that I learned at Price, which was a priority for me because I knew it was an area that I needed to grow as a professional, was to be able to look at budgets. And I had already gone down that path. And, you know, as you talk about this, I think a really important call from the current like movement for Black Lives is, you know, it's summed up in defund the police, right? And that is a very short phrase, but really the way I take it to mean is about what does budget accountability look like and how are we effectively investing our dollars to achieve public safety and address root causes. So for instance, as a wonk, in between all these things, I've like shuffled through the county budget and discovered some things that, you know, were pretty, I was, you know, I think because I had the skill set, but also the time, and that was my job and my role, I was able to kind of unearth some things that I think are really important that are hidden in plain sight. It's not public information, but some of this information is presented in such a way that like, it's so intimidating and so difficult that like it's, you know, average person is not going to be able to see that. So that's, I think it's using it and then leveraging the moment. You know, I've been really busy since July because, you know, there is a political moment and it's important to try to accomplish that, but having all that research and stuff already done in the background. So, you know, okay, this is what we should do next.
Yeah. We have one good question from the audience, but I want to follow up briefly on this point before we leave the subject. Talk to me a little bit about the communications challenge in when you're speaking to the people who are coming in from the movement side, and you're trying to talk about something as abstract and numerical and bureaucratic as budgets, and you're dealing with a situation that is really driven by very powerful emotion. Talk about a little bit you know, how you bridge those two worlds when you're in the position you're in.
I think it's all about materials, honestly. Like, materials. And county governments are not county governments, local governments and governments in general are really, it's not their strong suit, right? To present information in a way that is accessible. So, especially because I work with young people, you know, so we got to break it down, and sometimes might not be moving from one thing to the next as quickly as, as I might if I was by myself. But I like, what I mean by materials is like really being very intentional in the way that we present information. Trying to use graphs, trying to use visuals, trying to use things that tell a story. Mm-hmm. I think that is really important. And then like opening up that space for people to process it, for people to, I just want to kind of give a story about how these two things come together and why you shouldn't ever do the one and without, why it's important to both apply research and whatnot, but you have to bring it back to community. And that's where like also what I think creates both emotion, but I can really move change is, as far as, at the end of the day, we're always like moved by our hearts, even if you're a policymaker. And so I was sharing about, how the Los Angeles County probation budget has consistently grown. It's grown, I think, about 25% for the youth incarceration budget. It has grown about 25% in the last 10 years. Meanwhile, youth incarceration has decreased by about 70% in the same time period. So this is when you think about how to bring the, making the graphs, they tell a very clear story where you just go like, what? And, found that just for the Juvenile Institution Services Budget Unit, which is the part of the probation department that covers the camps and halls and the youth incarceration part of that budget, this year it was passed for $398 million a year in LA County. So just massive. And you have even for the last few years, there's been actually less than 1,000 youth on average each day in the camps and halls. And that has been further reduced to about 500 on average since COVID. And you're really starting to get to over $750,000 per year to just incarcerate just one young person. I'm able to unearth that. That was hidden in plain sight, but to be able to really, But what was so impactful as a story was, I work with young people who have spent years of their teenage years in these systems, and they just stop and go, well, how much money was spent on me?
Yeah.
And how much money was spent on me in my life, where in the end, I just ended up with more trauma and, versus what could that money have been spent on? And, you could have bought them a house, you could have sent them to, you could have sent somebody to an Ivy League school, all expenses paid, and not even scratch the surface of how much it costs to incarcerate them for 1 year. So, and that's the part, I tear up on the meeting, but it's just so I think that's just an example personally where you're like, okay, here are all the numbers, and then this is what it translates to somebody's life and what it really means to their life.
Yeah. Interesting. Very good. Well, we have a couple of questions, one very specific and one broad. I'll start with the specific one. Are you familiar with the Playa Vista program to provide probationers with construction apprenticeship jobs at public construction projects?
I am not familiar with that particular program. I don't know if it's on the adult side or not, but I think that generally trying to provide people with ability to get good living wage jobs is a good thing that we're continuing to try to push for.
Mm-hmm. And so the broader question here, what is the primary institution that you would advocate to refund if we were to defund a portion of the police department?
So I think that really depends on what, I think it's back to our, the beginning of this conversation, understanding the problems, right? So I think that you have to say, well, what is the issue that we're trying to address? Through my work with you, Roberto, I saw that 25% of all arrests at LAPD were for folks experiencing homelessness, oftentimes for low-level offenses. So you might say, what are people being arrested for? And how much money are we spending on these arrests? And is there something else for this particular, you have to be specific. You have to say, well, and each system is different, right? So, but oftentimes it's folks with mental health issues. It's folks experiencing homelessness. Or young people, right, experiencing certain things. And so I just think there's no one size fits all. It's really about understanding a particular system, who are the people who are being caught up in that system, and what are the things that alternative services and responses that can address the root cause of why they're there in the first place.
So last topic, and I know this is a totally unfair question, but so give us your thoughts about where you see yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Where would you like to be? What's the ideal trajectory there?
That is always a really hard question for me. I'm never the 5-year plan person. So I'm not really going to give a satisfying answer, but I feel like I'm on the right path. I feel like one thing that I'm appreciating about my current role in LA County is this is the biggest county in the country. I'm learning really about not about pushing for policy change, but partnering with the county and county agencies to make sure that things are implemented well. And implementation is so often like an afterthought when it's really one of the most important pieces. I do see myself probably continuing to work in criminal justice or maybe immigration or the nexus of those two things. And then just like, yeah, just trying to continue to affect change. So I'm actually like, I'm not sure, but I just feel like everything kind of builds, the one thing builds onto the next. And obviously we have a long time, a long arc around our criminal justice system, and it is so complicated. I feel like I finally started to understand a few things. So I should probably hold on to that knowledge and keep using it towards the good. So that's my that's my perhaps not super specific or satisfying answer, but there you go.
I mean, setting out and making a long-term commitment to improving, let alone reforming, let alone trying to reach some kind of ideal in criminal justice is quite substantial. I mean, that even if you only did it in LA County, that could keep you busy for a long time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, this has been great to spend a little bit of time with you again and to catch up on your work. And I hope that our students and other members of the Price community who've been with us for the past half hour have enjoyed hearing a bit about what you've been up to. We'll of course stay in touch with you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to plug I work at Urban Peace Institute. If you want to check out layoutuprising.org is our coalition email address, and a very informative policy website called trpi-justice.org. Roberto and I work together, and I actually think it is a really good breakdown on a lot of these issues. So I encourage people to check it out.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you both so much.
Well, thank you very much. And I think that wraps us up for this afternoon.